Have you ever woken up at 3 a.m. and just started doing math in your head? You're lying there in the dark, running numbers. How much is in savings? How much is still on the credit card? How long until you're actually okay? How long until you're actually free? And somewhere in that 3 a.m. math session, a question floats up that's almost too uncomfortable to say out loud. Am I where I'm supposed to be? Not where you dreamed of being at 25, not the Instagram version of your life, just compared to the average American your age, right now with what you know about money, are you ahead, behind, or roughly on track? Most people have never seen the actual answer to that question. Today, you're going to, because the data on what the average 40-year-old American actually has, not what financial media tells you, not what your coworkers project, but the real Federal Reserve numbers, is one of the most clarifying and, for many people, most motivating things I've ever seen. And by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly where you stand and exactly what to do about it. Here's the thing about being 40 in America. Nobody gives you a financial report card. At school, you got grades. At work, you get performance reviews. But your actual financial position, your net worth, your trajectory, how you compare to your peers, you mostly have to figure that out alone, with incomplete information, while simultaneously managing a job, a family, a mortgage, and the endless noise of a financial media machine that profits from your anxiety. No wonder so many people arrive at 40 feeling behind and not knowing what behind even means. And I want to be clear, I'm not sharing these numbers to shame anyone. I've spent 22 years watching the financial system operate from the inside, and I know that most people who are behind aren't behind because they're lazy or irresponsible. They're behind because the game wasn't explained to them, because the system extracts quietly, consistently, in ways we covered in our last video on the 5 invisible taxes the middle class pays every single month. But today, we're going to add a dimension to that conversation that most financial content is afraid to touch. The real numbers, what the average 40-year-old actually has, what it means, and what the gap between that number and financial security actually looks like in dollars.
If you're new here, I'm Lisa. I spent 22 years inside investment banking watching the strategies the wealthiest institutions and individuals use to build and protect wealth. Not tips, actual structural strategies. And what I found after 2 decades inside that world was that the reason most people never access those strategies isn't intelligence or effort, it's information. The financial industry benefits when you don't understand your own situation. This channel exists to change that, one uncomfortable truth at a time. If today's video makes you feel something, good. That feeling is data, and data is exactly what we need right now. If you want to stop flying blind financially and start making decisions with real clarity, subscribe and hit like. Every week, we go deeper into the numbers that actually matter. Let's get into it. What the numbers actually say. Okay, here are the actual Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finance's numbers. These are not estimates. These are not projections. These are what Americans actually report. The median net worth of Americans between ages 35 and 44 is approximately $135,000. Let that land. $135,000. That's the middle of the road. Half of Americans in their late 30s and early 40s have more, half have less. Now, here's what makes that number more than just a number. It's not what you think it is when you look closer, because that $135,000 median net worth, for most households, it isn't liquid cash. It isn't an investment portfolio. It's almost entirely home equity, the paper difference between what your house is worth and what you still owe on it. Strip away home equity and the median liquid net worth, meaning savings, investments, retirement accounts, for a 40-year-old American household is closer to $30,000 to $40,000. $30,000 to $40,000 in liquid assets. That's approximately 6 to 8 months of median household expenses. for a lifetime of work. The retirement gap. Let's take this one layer deeper, because retirement savings specifically is where the crisis becomes acute. The median retirement savings for Americans aged 35 to 44 is approximately $45,000. At standard 7% average annual market returns, $45,000 growing for 25 more years until age 65 becomes approximately $244,000. The commonly cited rule of thumb for retirement is that you need 25 times your annual expenses saved to sustain your lifestyle without working. For a household spending $60,000 a year, and that's not extravagant by American standards, that's $1,500,000 needed at retirement. The average 40-year-old is on track to retire with $244,000. They need $1,500,000. That gap is $1,256,000, and most people have no idea it exists. That is not a savings problem. That is a structural problem that started decades before today, and it has a name. The mean versus median illusion. Here's one more data point that explains why most people feel confused about where they stand. The mean, the average, net worth of Americans ages 35 to 44 is approximately $549,000. The median is $135,000. The mean is $549,000. That $414,000 gap between average and median is almost entirely explained by the top 10% of households pulling the average upward. The typical American experience, the median, is radically different from the average that gets reported. When financial media says the average American has $549,000 in net worth at 40, they're not lying, but they're also not describing you or your neighbors, or most people you know. They're describing a statistical artifact created by extreme wealth concentration.
Now, here's where I need to be direct with you, in the way that someone who actually wants you to succeed has to be. The structural problems are real. The 5 invisible taxes we covered last week are real. The retirement gap is real, and none of that is your fault. But there are also choices, repeated over years and decades, that contributed to these numbers, and I'm not going to skip past them, because skipping past them is exactly what keeps people stuck. The structural problem created the conditions. Your daily choices determined how much of the damage you absorbed. The average American car payment is now over $700 per month, over a 7-year loan for a depreciating asset. $700 a month for 7 years is $58,800 in payments on a vehicle that might be worth $12,000 when the loan is done. That same $700 per month, invested at 7% annual returns for 7 years, becomes approximately $79,000, not to retire on, just from one car payment cycle. How many car payment cycles has the average 40-year-old been through? 3 cycles of car payments at $700 a month, invested instead at 7%, would have compounded to approximately $300,000. That's more than twice the median liquid net worth of a 40-year-old household from one spending category. Every time most Americans got a raise, their expenses rose to match it. This is called lifestyle inflation, and it is the single most documented destroyer of middle-class wealth in the research literature. You got a $10,000 raise. You got a slightly bigger apartment, slightly nicer car, slightly more dining out, and your savings rate stayed exactly the same or got worse because your baseline rose and the next emergency hit a bigger budget. A raise that gets fully consumed by lifestyle inflation doesn't build wealth. It builds a larger financial baseline that's harder to maintain. The average American household now pays over $900 per month in subscriptions, memberships, and recurring services, many of which they've forgotten they signed up for. $900 a month, that's $10,800 a year, leaving their account automatically before they make a single conscious spending decision.
I'm not saying cancel Netflix. I'm saying that the subscription model was specifically designed to exploit the human tendency to underestimate recurring small costs. It's the financial equivalent of the boiling frog. And speaking of the next level of this conversation, next video we're going to go deep on why the very job most middle-class Americans see as their path to financial security might actually be one of the primary mechanisms keeping them from it. That video is going to connect everything we've talked about in this series into a picture most people have never seen clearly. Make sure you're subscribed.
I want to show you exactly how the math of a typical American financial life produces these numbers, because when you see the mechanism, you can identify where to intervene. Let's build a model. A typical American who started working at 22, earning a starting salary of $45,000. Let's follow their money. The first decade, ages 22 to 32. Salary, $45,000 to $65,000 over a decade. Plenty of income, but also student loans averaging $37,000, first car purchase on credit, first apartment deposit, lifestyle establishment costs. Most people in this decade save very little, sometimes nothing, because the cost of establishing adult life consumes nearly everything above survival. This isn't irresponsibility, this is the structural cost of entering American adulthood. By 32, the typical profile, $15,000 to $30,000 in a 401k if they started early, $10,000 to $20,000 in other savings, student debt largely paid or refinanced, a car loan, and the beginning of either a mortgage or a steady rent payment. Net worth at 32, approximately $50,000 to $80,000, heavily skewed toward home equity if they bought. The first decade barely moved the needle, and that's the decade when compound interest is most powerful. The second decade, ages 32 to 42, this is the decade that determines everything. Income is now higher, $65,000 to $90,000 on average. Children may arrive, the mortgage commitment becomes real, career-defining decisions happen. This is also the decade when the car payment cycle is at its most aggressive, lifestyle inflation is in full swing, and the difference between households that build wealth and those that don't becomes clearly visible. The household that saves 15 to 20% of income in this decade and avoids the car trap arrives at 42 with approximately $250,000 to $350,000 in net worth. The compound curve is beginning. The household that saves 3 to 5%, the American average, and cycles through car payments and subscription creep arrives at 42 with approximately $100,000 to $150,000, mostly home equity, thin liquid reserves, far from the retirement number. The difference between these two households isn't income, it's the savings rate in years 32 through 42. That one variable, compounded over the remaining working years, is worth approximately $800,000 to $1,200,000 at retirement. Here's the math I want you to sit with. $500 per month saved and invested from age 32 at 7% annual return reaches age 65 as approximately $730,000. $1,000 per month saved and invested from age 32 at 7% annual return reaches age 65 as approximately $1,460,000. The difference between saving $500 a month and $1,000 a month over 33 years is $730,000, not because of the extra $500 monthly, but because of what compound interest does to that difference over time. $500 extra per month redirected from consumption to investment is worth $730,000 at retirement. That's the math of compound interest, operating across 33 years. That's not a savings tip, that's a structural reallocation with a 7-figure payoff. You don't need to be rich to build wealth. You need to redirect the money that's currently leaving your life quietly, consistently, every month.
So what does it actually look like to change your trajectory from here? Not from a hypothetical starting point, from where most people actually are right now. I want to give you a framework with real numbers, because invest more isn't a plan. A plan has milestones. Milestone 1, the emergency foundation, $15,000. Before you can build wealth, you need to stop losing ground. And the primary way Americans lose ground financially is emergencies that become debt. A car breaks down, a medical bill arrives, a job becomes uncertain. Without liquid reserves, these events go on credit cards at 22% APR, and once on credit cards, they compound against you. The first milestone is $15,000 in a high-yield savings account, not invested, not tied up, liquid and accessible. At current HYSA rates of 4 to 5%, this also earns $600 to $750 per year in passive interest while sitting there. This milestone has a name in behavioral finance. It's called the unbreakable position. Once you have 3 to 4 months of true emergency reserves, your relationship with financial risk fundamentally changes. You stop making expensive, desperate decisions. Milestone 2. The employer match capture, full 401k match. If your employer offers a 401k match and you're not contributing enough to capture the full match, you are literally declining a raise. That is the most expensive mistake on this list. Milestone 3, the debt elimination cascade. Consumer debt is the single most destructive financial instrument the average American carries. Credit card debt at 22 to 29% APR is a guaranteed negative return on every dollar you hold in savings while carrying a balance. A dollar in a savings account earning 4% while you carry $10,000 in credit card debt at 22% is a net negative 18% on that dollar. The math is unambiguous. Milestone 3 is eliminating all consumer debt above 10% APR. This is not about being debt-free, it's about not being in negative return debt while simultaneously trying to build positive return assets. Paying off a 22% credit card balance is an investment with a guaranteed 22% return. No market instrument comes close. Debt elimination is the highest yield investment most Americans have access to right now. Milestone 4, the savings rate escalator. Once the emergency fund exists and consumer debt is gone, every freed-up dollar has a new destination, a systematic savings rate of 15 to 20% of gross income. The research on household wealth accumulation is consistent. The savings rate matters more than the investment return for the first 15 years of building. You cannot invest your way out of a low savings rate, but a consistent savings rate compounds into a portfolio that then begins to generate its own momentum. The identity shift is this. You stop being someone who saves what's left after spending, you become someone for whom saving is the first expenditure, and spending is what happens with what remains. Pay yourself first, not because it sounds motivational, because it is the only mechanism that has been consistently proven to build household wealth across income levels.
Let me bring it home. The median 40-year-old American has approximately $135,000 in net worth, mostly home equity, and $45,000 in retirement savings. They are on track to reach retirement with approximately $244,000 and need $1,500,000. That gap is real. It is large. And for many people watching this video, the number I just described is somewhere close to their own situation. I'm not telling you this to create despair. I'm telling you this because the gap between where you are and where you could be is not a fixed distance. The gap is time sensitive. At 40, you still have 25 years of compound growth available to you. At 50, you have 15. The difference between starting your reversal blueprint today versus in 5 years is not 5 years of contributions. It's a multiple of your final wealth position. And here's the thing I want to leave you with. Every video we've done in this series, the credit score lie, the 5 invisible taxes, and today's net worth reality check, has been pointing at the same thing.
The average American financial outcome is not the result of average intelligence or average effort. It's the result of average information, average understanding of how the system works. You are not average information anymore. That is not a small thing. That is the entire game. The number that defines your retirement isn't set yet, but the decisions you make in the next 12 months will do more to set it than anything you do in the 12 years after that. If this video moved the needle on how you see your own financial position, share it with one person who needs to see these numbers. Not to depress them, to free them, because you can't change a number you can't see. Subscribe, because next week's video is going to complete the picture in a way that I think will genuinely shock you. We've talked about the invisible taxes that charge you more for being middle class. We've looked at where the average 40-year-old actually stands. In next video, we're going to look at the vehicle most Americans believe is their ticket out and show exactly why, for most people, it isn't. Why your good job is keeping you broke. The middle class income illusion. Next video. Subscribe so you don't miss it. See you there.